Good evening, viewers. Welcome to another edition of My Take with yours truly. Good evening to those viewers from within the Guyanese diaspora as well. Thank you for joining us. As promised last week, you would recall that I said I did not get to touch on all the issues I wanted to touch on last week. So I'm here tonight, as promised, to deal with some other issues before reverting to my usual schedule, which is once every month to do this program. So coming right off from where I left off, starting from where I left off last week, I was about to get into these emerging NGOs or these new NGOs and groups of stakeholders that have emerged in Guyana's political landscape. And when I say political landscape, engaging in stimulating certain narrative, shaping certain narrative, propagating certain positions on national policies, on the government. They criticize government policies, which is fine. It's okay to criticize, but the substance of the criticism is another matter. So there is this group that I would like to zoom into. It's called the Oil and Gas Governance Network. This Oil and Gas Governance Network was formed. It's an organization formed in the United States by a group of Guyanese living abroad, residing abroad. And it was formed in 2017, and based on my research, I think they were not so long ago registered with the IRS, and they're registered as a certain non-profit organization where they enjoy certain privileges such as tax-exempt status. Now, those status in the US tax law and in the US system comes with strict rules, strict guidelines, stringent guidelines that govern their operations. Now, before I get into why I want to zoom into this group and some others, well, those associated with this group, let me state at the outset that nothing is wrong with if you want to criticize the government. Nothing is wrong to share your views, to speak freely, to write freely. All of that is fine in a free society, in a democracy. But what I have a problem with is when you are speaking from a position that project yourself as though you are genuine, wherein the truth is you're not genuine, and you basically have a hidden agenda. Why hide behind organizations, or why hide behind all sorts of titles? Just, if you're a political activist, or if you don't like the government and you want to be like the opposition, to just criticize or to hold the government accountable, as many of them say they're doing, don't do it under the pretext of something else. And this is what this group of persons do, which I will demonstrate later in the program. I'll give you at least reasonable evidence to substantiate what I'm saying. That is what I have an issue with. People who speak with forked tongue and people who have hidden agenda. And I'll expose at least two of the members associated with this group when I'm done explaining about this group, what they're doing. So this organization is formed, and they're right, the members The members are Andre Brandley. Those of you who read the news, who read the newspapers, the letters section, you would find letters written on a frequently by Andre Brandley. Alfred Boulay is affiliated with them. You have Charles O'Grim, Janet Bulkan, familiar names in the newspapers on a daily basis. Mike Passard, Kenrick Hunt, all these names are affiliated. Some of them are directors, some of them are members of this oil and gas governance network, Ganga Ramdas, and so on. Now, this group was set up based on their mission. They claim that they are educating people and they're fighting to protect, they're representing the interest of Guyanese. They want Guyanese to get more benefit. Yet, in their public position on certain matters, their advocacy work is quite to the contrary. For example, you want better for the people, you're championing, in the case of Janet Bulkan, championing the rights of Amerindians and how Amerindians should be treated, indigenous communities, and at the same time labeling the carbon credit deal a fraudulent deal perpetuated by the government, which is a deal that would see hundreds of millions of dollars, 15% of the money that we earn, 15% of 750 million US, at minimum, will go directly to those indigenous communities. She has a problem with that. And there are many other examples. So this particular group, when you examine their activities, they are, and you read the rules and the guidelines pursuant to the IRS rules and guidelines, you would find that they're in violation of almost all of them. So, for example, they're not supposed to be engaged in political campaign, political activism, and advocacy work. And this is precisely what they do. They're engaged in Guyana in, I would call it, a covert political campaign. They're engaged in excessive lobbying activities. They are required to publish their financial statements, audited financial statements, their tax return. They haven't published any. They're required to publish their bylaws. So they haven't published anything surrounding what they're legally required to publish in relation to their operations. Yet, in the local media in Guyana, they project themselves as the guru of everything in oil and gas, the gurus of environment, and that they have a better alternative, and championing, pushing this whole renegotiation nonsense with the likes of Glenn Lal et al. And that they want to hold the government accountable and in the interest of transparency and all these things. But they themselves are not transparent and they are not accountable to anybody. But pursuant to the US laws, they are accountable to the public because they are registered as a tax-exempt organization. They solicit funding. They can solicit funding from the public, whether it's within the Guyanese diaspora in the US or whether it is home here in Guyana. They're accountable to the public, right? And they're focusing exclusively in Guyana. So this organization, you could do your own research to verify what I'm saying. And when you look at it, you would see that they're violating all the rules. So how could the government even take them seriously? And I have written, those of you who follow my writings, when I did this bit of research about this organization and its members, I wrote a letter which is in the public domain calling on the government to de-recognize them because they have no legitimate basis to engage the government. They have no constituency who they're representing, and they're violating their own US laws. But they're getting away with it because the IRS would not police them, and their work is not within the US, within that jurisdiction. Their work is based on another jurisdiction, which the IRS will not monitor. So that's in relation to the organization. Now let's look at, I should mention, interestingly, one of its members, when I started to expose this organization for what it is and all of the violation, one of its members, Charles Grimm, shortly thereafter started his own platform. So he sort of pulled out from the OGGN, but he's still claiming that he hasn't disassociated himself. He's still claiming that his colleagues who are part of this organization are the most esteemed, distinguished, brilliant people on the planet. They're the most visionary thinkers. That's how he described them. So I want now to turn my attention to some of the things that he has been saying on his platform in relation to the oil and gas sector. So the first video he made, he came up with this egregiously nonsensical theory. Now, for the gullible who is listening to it, it might not sound as nonsense, but when you really think of what he's talking about and sought to examine what he's talking about, it's all nonsense. So what he's saying, so he came up with this theory that, or this assumption that, I have to give you a little bit of history to understand what he's saying. So following the 1999 agreement, exploration license, ExxonMobil was in a 50-50 partnership with Shell. Now, Shell in 2014 gave up. After about 15 years, there was no successful commercial discovery up to 2014, and they gave up, and so they exited the partnership. All of this is public information. This is not proprietary information. All this information is within the public domain. So Shell gave up its partnership. Now Exxon, through its subsidiary EEPGL, is the holder of the exploration license and now the production license for the Stabroek block. After Shell exited the partnership, Exxon then wrote to about 35 companies inviting them to partner, to form a co-venture with them, to partner in their exploration activities and for oil in the Stabroek block. And two companies responded. Those two companies are CNOOC and Hess, and so they're referred to in the agreements as the co-venture. The contracting parties are referred to as ExxonMobil's co-venture partners. So Charles Grimm came up with this idea that Exxon is a smart company, which is true, and that Exxon would not allow Hess and CNOOC to join it in this partnership, to come on board to explore for oil in the Stabroek block without making a deal. And he's saying that all this is speculation, I don't know how this man came up with this idea. And he's saying that they must have made a deal, and Exxon must have demanded them to pay a lot of money. And then in the second video, this thing is circulating, so that's why I'm addressing it, because it will soon become the narrative of Glenn Lal and all over the place. So the next video he made, which is 2 days after, he came up with a figure. He says, if CNOOC and Hess paid Exxon $10 billion US, right, $10 billion US, then the government of Guyana, it comes back now to the government of Guyana must demand Exxon to pay to the government 50% of this money. And from this 50% that the government must demand from this deal, 60% must be distributed to each household. Right? Now, those of you who are not familiar with numbers and whether this make any sense, you might think this is a very plausible theory, right? Now let's examine the plausibility from a commonsensical layperson perspective before I get too technical. Now, I am not saying that there may very well be a deal of such nature, but not $10 billion US. It would be very, very, if at all, assuming if at all, it would be a very small amount, right? Let's use this $10 billion number. The Shell that was in this partnership since 1999 to 2014 exited. Now remember, Exxon is the contractor. So at all times, Exxon as the operator, Exxon is the operator. The partner is not involved in the operations. They're just sharing form this partnership to share the risk, to share the capital, share the cost, and of course they share the rewards, which is the profit. So if Exxon is the operator, you don't need to be a genius to know that Exxon would always be in a position where they have more information than the partner. They know what is there, and they have more confidence in what is there based on their work that the partner don't have, because the partner is not involved in the operation. So Shell, after 15 years, exited. Shell would have incurred exploration costs, and the exploration cost per well is a minimum of 60 million US per well, the maximum of 100 million US per well. It's probably more now with inflation. So now we know that the pre-contract cost was 460 million US dollars. That's the pre-contract cost, the exploration cost that they have expended before they made a commercial discovery. 460 million US dollars. Right? 460 million US dollars is about $97 billion, close to 100 billion Guyana dollars. Right? Now, if the exploration cost that Shell already put 50% of it for 15 years, that's sunk cost. Exxon didn't have to refund them. That's their loss. CNOOC and Hess coming in 2014, and then there was commercial fine in 2015. Why would CNOOC and Hess pay 10 billion US dollars when the exploration cost is 460 million? The development cost for one field, for Liza 1 development cost alone, was 4 billion. The development cost for another field, I think is Payara, is about is about 6 billion US. Yellowtail is 9 billion US. 9 billion US is the development cost to develop that field. Why would Hess and CNOOC pay $10 billion, right? Now that you have that perspective, just to be part of this Stabroek block, when they gotta find between Hess and CNOOC, they have their stake, their equity stake is 55%. Exxon has 45%. Exxon alone has 45%. So that means all the cost is split with that formula. All the development cost, the exploration cost, all the capital investment, initial capital, got to be split 55% between Hess and CNOOC, and Exxon put 45%. So why would Hess and CNOOC put in $10 billion just to be part of this, which is the development cost to develop almost two fields? Say Liza 1 and Liza 2 is between those two is 10 billion. And then on top of that, they got to pay another 55% of 10 billion. Does that make any sense? Do you think all companies got money like that to throw around? So that's from a layman, that's a layman's analysis, a layperson's analysis. Let's look at the technical analysis now, which I'm going to simplify for you. So what is the technical analysis? The technical analysis is very simple. If you want to know if Hess and CNOOC could afford to pay $10 billion US, and at that time our GDP was just 4 billion. So that's more than twice our pre-oil GDP. Hess and CNOOC are both public companies, the publicly traded companies. So their annual report for their entire global operations is publicly available on the internet. So anybody could go and Google it and download it and look at the numbers. And if there was any merit to that, it means that they would have had to pay Exxon between 2014 and 2015. So let's look at the financial state of these two companies collectively and cumulatively for this period between 2014 and 2015. Whether this $10 billion make any sense from the perspective of whether it would have been feasible and whether they could afford. So in 2015, Hess total revenue alone was $6.5 billion. That's their revenue alone, 6.5 billion. So you're saying to me, Charles Sugrim, brilliant Charles Sugrim, that Hess gonna pay $10 billion, or let's say half of $10 billion, that's $5 billion, and their revenue, their total global revenue is only 6.5 billion US for 1 year? Does that make any sense? And then in 2015, this was a period when there was low oil prices. So in 2015, Hess wasn't doing too well. Hess made a loss of 4.25 billion US. They made a loss. CNOOC, for the same period, made a profit of 2.8 billion US. Right? So cumulatively, adding Hess and CNOOC's profit for 2014 and 2015, these two companies, listen to this, Hess and CNOOC profit for 2 years collectively altogether is 9.2 billion. It didn't even reach the $10 billion. Right? 9.2 billion, still short of 10 billion. So could you imagine how stupid this is, what this guy is proposing? What this guy is saying must have happened and the government should get 50% of that. These two companies, if they could come up with $10 billion on top of that, they would go out of business. Right? They would go out of business. Let's take it a little bit more technical. He could argue and say, well, the $10 billion is already in the cost. So the profit declared is after the cost, that 10 billion is deducted. So what's the total cost? The total operating costs for these two companies for 2 years amounted to $12 billion. So you're saying that 12 billion is the operating cost, 10 of which 10 billion is to pay Exxon in Guyana. It would be so significant, more than 90% of your total operating costs, when these are two global companies that have operations all across the globe, oil and gas operations, exploration, production, and development activities all across. This is global. This is not one particular market. The total cost. These are the consolidated figures. So when you look at, without going too much into the numbers, I don't want to bore you too much with numbers, but with this alone, without going any further, that alone tells you that this theory can't make any sense. And these are highly qualified guys. In fact, I wrote a letter to that effect, which was published. And I am not shy to say that this guy is supremely more qualified than I am in finance. Right? He's supremely far more qualified than I am. I don't have half of the qualifications that he has in finance. And this is the nonsense he's peddling. Right? And these guys, he has a political history too. He's a known affiliate of the AFC, and now he's part of this other group, and it is reasonable to presume that this group were all part of the Glenlal et al. Group or grouping of people. They all have one narrative. If you listen to all of them, it's one consistent narrative. And there is a view which is reasonable that they want to hold the balance of power. That's their end game. In 2025, they want to run for elections, and they want to hold the balance of power in the National Assembly. Imagine if these guys get 1 or 2 seats, what they would do. And we don't have to go far back in our history. We had a minority government in 2011, which led to the snap elections in 2015. And that was not an era we want to go back to. Nothing gets done. Nothing. The country would be on a standstill, because they would oppose everything and nothing will go through. So we can't allow these guys to succeed. And this is why I'm taking them on in this manner. I'm not just doing this program because I'm very transparent with my agenda. My agenda is very transparent. I have no hidden agenda. I don't have to hide behind an organization. I don't have to hide behind a title. I'm telling you transparently why I'm doing what I'm doing and what is these guys' motive, what is their end game. That is their end game. My objective is to prevent that from happening, because we can allow a small group of people to stall the development of an entire country? Not at all. We can't allow that to happen. Now let's expose another one of the hypocrite. And this one, I did this today. Let me zoom into her. So, Janet Bolkan. Janet Bolkan is also part of the oil and gas government. And listen how she is more of a hypocrite. She labeled the government. She characterized the carbon credit transaction as fraudulent. But when you listen to what I'm about to tell you, that term fraudulent is more suitable to apply it to describe her. Janet Bolkan, if you go on the internet now as I speak and you Google her name, and you research, you spend some time, take about 10-15 minutes on the internet, you would find that she was an antagonizer of the present government in the pre-2015 era. She was an antagonizer of this government in its previous term in office. In 2015 to 2020, she fell off the planet, missing in action. Not a single article, not a single letter, not a single statement from her for that period. Not one. Those who are opponents of the government and who don't like the government and who consistently criticize the government hold these people on high pedestal. Oh, Janet Bulkan is a scholar. She's an esteemed, distinguished scholar. She holds such and such position in such university. All of that means nothing to me. It's what I'm about to tell you. If she was such a distinguished ethical scholar, then the first thing a scholar does when an academic writes an academic paper, they gotta declare whether there is conflict of interest. They gotta dedicate an entire section on ethical considerations. Ethical considerations. And disclose whether there was any cognitive biases and so on. That is what a scholar does. A scholar operates with a true scholar, a true academic, operate with the highest degree of integrity, honesty, and credibility. If she has a nothing is wrong for an academic to have a political agenda or engage in political activism work. That's fine, but declare it, say so. Don't present yourself as this scholar, but really you're a political activist. So why am I saying she's a political activist? Janet Bulkan, now she's Dr. Janet Bulkan because she's a professor, she has a PhD, but I don't attribute doctor, I don't refer to her as doctor because I have no respect for her. I have no regard for her because of what she does. She doesn't command any sort of respect or deserve any sort of respect, really. So no one in the public knows this. I don't think the entire country knows this. She is the sibling of a former minister under the APNU government. The former Minister of Communities, Ronald Bulkan, is her brother. She never disclosed that. That's the first thing she should have done as an academic. So, and when you read her writings, there's a letter she wrote in yesterday's Tabruk and Saturday's Kaichur. Lofty praises for the APNU FC government. Lofty praises. Right? Praise the opposition's proposal, and she has the audacity to label this government a totalitarian. Oh, Guyana is becoming more and more of a totalitarian state. But she is aligned with the PNC. Her brother is a former minister under the PNC government. That is who she is. That is why she never wrote anything. During that period, she never criticized them. Let's now delve into her work and look at the inconsistencies and her hypocritical nature. Or her, let's use the word hypocritical nature. So, I want to read certain parts of the letter I wrote today where she described Guyana as moving into a state of as a totalitarian state, with meaning an authoritative dictatorial sort of regime. And what did she use as the basis? The opposition, the AFC member of parliament, made certain proposed proposed certain amendments to the petroleum bill, and the government rejected it. And because the government rejected it, and because the government said in their manifesto that they are going to establish a petroleum commission, and the bill did not talk about the petroleum commission, she's saying that those are tendencies of a totalitarian government. Now we'll examine the merit of that after I say what I want to say about Janet Bulkan. Let's understand what is a totalitarian government and the particular example she used. So totalitarianism is defined as a state of government that is centralized and dictatorial and requires subservience to the state. Based on this definition, there was a time when Guyana was such a state in the pre-1992 era, and I think we all know this well. Now here is the case study that she referenced. She talked about the state of Orwell's nation. If you go on Google and Google that case study, research that case study, you would find what I'm about to read to you. The citizens of that country have no individual rights or human agency to behave, think, or live the way they want. The totalitarian regime demands complete uniformity, and any deviation from the norm is considered a threat to the state and severely punished. In order to ensure uniformity and identify political descendants, the population of Oceania is under constant surveillance. Now, these features of totalitarianism are not present in the Guyana of today. We all could write freely, we could speak freely. None of this exists in the Guyana of today. If, however, there were any signal of a return to that state in recent times, there are several credible examples of such under the former government during the period 2015-2020. And hereunder, I present to you some examples. Number one, and these I can relate to personally. Number one, whenever the government engages in public consultation to shape any national policy, legislation, and even the national budget, this exercise was always a facade. The results from the consultations were never reflected in the final product. For example, the local content policy of the former government, I participated in submitting extensive contributions on behalf of the business associations in Guyana. The same during budget consultations, and not a single contribution were ever taken on board. Number two, the former government went against their own Commission of Inquiry's recommendations in relation to the sugar industry. The COI report concluded in unambiguous terms not to close any sugar estates at that time, considering the socio-economic impact. Yet the former government disregarded this advice, which resulted in the termination of over 7,000 sugar workers. These are totalitarian behavior. Third example, the former president refused on many occasions to meet with legitimate stakeholders such as the private sector bodies, leaders during his tenure. Fourth, the former president engaged in multiple constitutional breaches, such as the unilateral appointment of the former chairperson of GCOM. Fifth, and of course, you have the 2020 elections fiasco, where there was a desperate and transparent attempt to steal the elections by the former government. Contrast this type of behavior by the former government that are more so in conformity with totalitarian tendencies. Reflect now on the fact that the incumbent government engages directly with the people through community outreaches all across the country, subject itself to harsh criticisms from the people on the ground, make decisions on the spot to bring about necessary interventions in response to their issues, and those engagements help in a major way to inform policy making. Additionally, reflect on the fact that the Local Content Act, the new model production sharing agreements, the Petroleum Activities Bill, the Low Carbon Development Strategy were subject to public consultations. In the case of the LCDS, the Amerindian communities were not merely consulted, but were directly involved in the process to craft the updated LCDS. Consequently, the feedback obtained from these consultative engagements have been taken into account to a large extent in shaping of the final products. The same is true every year during the national budget consultations. Yet, Janet Bulkan extends lofty praises for the former APNU government, and she continues to do so even though now they are not in government. So I already said to you that, or revealed to you that her endorsement of the APNU FC/PNC is not one that is underpinned by the merit of their policies per se, but rather it is based on the fact that her sibling served as a former minister under the APNU government. Now, what happened during that time? Imagine she has the audacity to pretend as though she cares in a genuine way for the Amerindian people, while she labeled the carbon credit deal fraudulent, a deal that will transfer tangible benefits to the Amerindian communities to finance their village development programs. Thus, it is reasonable to question her integrity and credibility at this point, since she had no concern for the same group of people during the period 2015 and 2020. Now, what happened then? I'm reading, this is a letter I wrote today that was published by TDN, and hopefully it is published tomorrow. One would recall that the former government terminated some 2,000 Amerindians who worked in their communities as community support officers, effectively taking away about $4 billion annually from the Amerindian villages. This is not the only injustice to the Amerindians by the former government that Janet Bulkan supports. The former government also added VAT on domestic air transport, which increased the cost of goods and airfares for the people residing in hinterland communities. That's not all. The Amerindian land titling project was left dormant under the former government. And this woman has the audacity to say that, oh, the carbon credit deal is fraudulent and championing the rights of Amerindians, when all these atrocities were done to this group of people by her government. Her brother, who was part of that government, she supports that. See the hypocrisy of these people, and see why we have to expose them. We have to expose them because they have a political agenda, a common political agenda. Now, having said that, we have enough time. Before I conclude tonight now, so I said to you, she used the petroleum bill and the fact that the government rejected the opposition's proposal, and basically used that to say, oh, this is totalitarianism taking place. Now again, I dealt with this as well. I dealt with this today, and this should be published tomorrow or the following day. Let's examine the merits of what the opposition, their proposed amendments, right? The first one is the opposition proposed a formula ranging from a minimum of 60 to 40 and not higher than 70 to 30% for the production sharing. Now the 60-40, 70-30, this is how it was reported in the media. But what I gather from that is David Patterson, who is the shadow minister of oil and gas in the National Assembly, he's the one who presented these amendments. And what I gather from the way it was reported in the press is that he was referring to the cost recovery ceiling, which currently in the Stabroek block production sharing agreement is capped at 75%. So you have 25% basically to split 50-50 in profit. So he's proposing that that it should be the law, the Petroleum Activities Bill, should include the figures minimum 60%, maximum 70%. So these proposals expose the level of, I don't know, the quality of work that the opposition present in the National Assembly. Because listen to my comment on this. It appears, and I explained this first part to you just now, it appears that this is in relation to the cost recovery ceiling of not less than 60 or 70%. Now, it can be argued that this is an inconsequential proposal, given that the new model PSA has already catered for this, wherein the cost recovery ceiling is capped at 65%, down from 75%. Additionally, the cost recovery ceiling forms part of the fiscal framework, which is prescribed as part of the terms and conditions in the production sharing agreement. The reason why it is not included in the petroleum law itself is because it is the law that would give effect to the PSC and vice versa. And then I went on to reference the specific sections in the bill, which will become law when the president assent to it. Right? Section 12 speaks to the petroleum agreement. I don't want to bore you with the language, but section 12 as well as section 13 establishes that where an application is made under section 32(1) for a petroleum production license, the minister may grant the license on such conditions as the minister determines are necessary to give effect to this act. So the word such conditions as the minister determine are the conditions pursuant to the production sharing agreement. So the first proposal tells me that the opposition, they didn't read the bill, they don't understand the bill, and they don't understand how this bill, how it would really operate when it's implemented to give effect to it, right? So that's the first proposal out the door. It basically doesn't make any sense. It's catered for. Second proposal, and this is what the esteemed Janet Bulkan described as fantastic. I mean, this is my opinion. The others could have different opinion. Huh? The second proposal, the opposition proposed to block operators from recouping their exploration costs by restricting commingling exploration with production costs. It goes on to state that a strict separation shall be maintained between exploration and production activities, costs and revenues. No revenue from production activities can be charged to exploration activities. Now these guys are saying that the Petroleum Act should prevent companies from recovering exploration costs from the production activities revenue. This is what these people are saying. Now let's understand this. So if we spend $100 million in exploration cost in well A, let's call it well A. In well A, we discovered that well A has oil in commercial quantities, so we're going to develop well A to produce from it. So when we develop this well and start to produce from it, the money that we generate from the sale of the crude oil of this well, produced from this well, we can't recover our exploration cost. I think these guys understand what they're talking about. They want to prevent the oil companies from recovering a substantial part or a significant portion of their capital investment. Exploration cost is part of their capital investment. There is exploration, then there is development, once there is a commercial find, and then you go into production. The production now is the production of the crude oil, extracting the crude oil, to sell it on global markets, so refine it into value-added goods, sell it, get more money, and the revenue is what you take out your costs, recover your exploration costs, recover your development costs, take out your operating costs, pay workers, pay salaries, pay suppliers, and what remains is your profit. Simple. So I don't understand the Second Amendment, what really where he expect them. Is he suggesting that they should treat the exploration cost as a loss or as a gift? This is a business. This is a multi-billion-dollar, high capital-intensive business. So, second proposal out the door makes no sense, and this is what the professor is saying. These are great amendments, and the government rejected. The government right to reject it. It makes no sense. Let's look at the third proposal. Should the cabinet grant the minister approval to conduct direct negotiations, the minister is required to seek the approval of the National Assembly before issuing the license. So the opposition wants the law empowers the minister to, there may be circumstances in which, rather than right now there is an auction, but there may be circumstances in which the government goes to direct negotiation. So following that negotiation, in any such situation, the opposition wants the law to state that the minister, and by extension the government, must go to the National Assembly to have those terms and conditions coming out of the negotiations approved by the National Assembly. Now let's understand this for a moment, right? Let's go back to basics. There are, first of all, before I get into that, let me talk about what might be examples of these special circumstances. You would recall that the Vice President had said that the government reserved a few oil blocks for country government-to-government collaboration in the future, to explore government-to-government collaboration. For example, India might have an interest, or Brazil, or whichever country, to partner. So government-to-government collaboration, that is my interpretation of that, specifically. So let's assume a situation of a government-to-government collaboration, whatever is negotiated there, and the terms derived therefrom, they want that to be approved by the National Assembly. So now that you understand an example of a situation that may arise in the future, or that is catered for in the future, let's now go back to basics. And the basic is there are three branches of government. There is the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive, right? And this is enshrined in the Constitution. The Constitution of Guyana, which is the supreme law of the land, prescribes the function of each branch. Now, negotiation in this particular situation, negotiating terms and conditions, pursuant to the laws, of course, in keeping within the parameters of the laws, is a function of the executive branch of government. It is not a function of the legislator. The function of the legislator is to make laws, is to pass laws and constitutional amendments and pass budgets, not to get involved in functions of the executive. These three branches of government are separate and independent of each other. So that is my interpretation, and from that perspective, if my analysis is correct, then that proposal to the third proposal by the opposition again makes no sense. Let's look. So that's how many? 3. Now the fourth, and this is the big one, the Petroleum Commission. So what is a Petroleum Commission? A Petroleum Commission is really, will function as a regulatory body. As of now, the regulatory aspects of the industry are carried out by various agencies, such as the Environmental Protection Agency. They carry out some aspects in relation to the environment in compliance with the environmental laws and regulations of the country. Some are carried out by perhaps the GGMC. There is the Guyana Revenue Authority, and others by the Ministry of Natural Resources. So these agencies altogether have to build up their in-house capacity. So this big cry that, oh, the government promised a petroleum commission and we don't have a petroleum commission, we got to understand the practicality. We have to take into consideration the practical aspects as well. And what are the practical considerations? The practical considerations are, number one, before setting up this commission, my take is you need to first have the framework, the prerequisite framework in place. What is that framework? We have the Local Content Act, and we have the Local Content Secretariat, which operationalize the Local Content Act and is also functioning as a regulatory agency to administer local content in relation to local content. That is part of the legal framework for the sector. We have the new model production chain agreements that now has to be finalized and approved. It is the Petroleum Act that will now give effect to that when it's signed into law by the President. We have a new Petroleum Activities Bill which will repeal the old, outdated 1986 Petroleum Act. And then following that, there are several other amendments to other pieces of legislation that may have to be conducted. Now that's in relation to the legal environment, the legislative environment for the sector, to manage the sector. Then you have the institutional, and of course you have the Natural Resource Fund Act and the Bank of Guyana, and that is an entire institution by itself, the board, the secretariat, and so on. Then, so the first is getting the laws, amending the laws, passing new laws. The second now is setting up the institutions. What are the institutions? Local Content Secretariat, Secretariat for the Natural Resource Fund, and building out, new departments, cost recovery, audit departments in the GRA, for example, within the ministry, the institutional framework. We got to set up the institutional framework and resource the institutional framework. The Petroleum Commission will also form part of the institutional framework. The number one practical consideration is we don't have the human resources. We don't have the technical human resources to staff a Petroleum Commission as yet. So right now, those functions, those regulatory functions are being carried out by the ministry and these other agencies with the aid of international consultants and consulting firms. Now, when we set up a Petroleum Commission, we don't want the commission to be, you want the Petroleum Commission to have at least 90%, if not 100%, Guyanese technocrats, Guyanese professionals. Right? So until we build up our human resources capacity and strengthen the existing institutions that are there, only until such time it would make sense for all practical reasons to set up a Petroleum Commission. And in some cases, it's not even necessary. So with that, I think my time is up. I think that's enough for tonight. So thank you for joining. Thank you for listening to this. Please share the